we are all esteemed Asians, and therefore that is why I am wearing this shirt. It's an honor just to be Asian. I thought I would just put that out there. This was a shirt that was created by East West Players as part of a fundraiser, and so I just want to give a shout out to my friends at East West, especially since I think you all have either been produced or somehow workshopped or something at East West. I know you have, Giovanni. But we're going to go around here and just do a quick introduction. So Kit, why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kit. I use they, he, and she pronouns. I'm dialing in today from Waipahu, Hawaii. And I'm super excited to be chatting with everyone. I write plays, poetry, and musicals. And I'm excited to be in the upcoming round of commissions here, working on a play called Mr. Transman about an alternative pageant.
Fantastic. Giovanni, why don't you go?
Hi, my name is Giovanni Ortega, and I'm here in Los Angeles. And I've been commissioned to write The Butterfly of Chula Vista.
How well do you know Chula Vista?
I'm going tomorrow.
Because that's where my parents live, so just want to say.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of work with UCSD and SDSU, so I would like drive down and then go to National City, go to, that strip of just Filipino restaurants. So
that's right. Manila Sunset.
I'm really excited. Yeah, I'm really excited for this opportunity.
Awesome. Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Alvarez. I'm also in Los Angeles. I'm originally from the Bay Area, up north, and I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Right. So what our three guests have in common, as they mentioned, is that the San Diego rep has commissioned them to write plays. And so I want to talk a little bit at first about how you all discovered this vocation of playwriting. How did it start? But let's start with Bonnie.
I came to playwriting via acting, which I think a lot of playwrights do. In undergrad, we were required to take classes outside of acting. So, technical and playwriting, directing. And I had a professor who said, oh, you really should consider yourself a writer-actor. And I thought she was crazy. I was just like, I'm going to be a star. What I'm going to need to write for. And then many years later, I transitioned to writing, and then it's all kind of come full circle where now and then I will still act upon occasion.
And I had the privilege of seeing you act in your show, which was a lot of fun.
Yes. That was that was a little nerve-wracking. That was after 13 years of not having acted. So
oh really? Wow. Yeah. Couldn't tell.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Giovanni?
Wait, did you saw Bonnie in Bloodletting?
It was the Aswang play.
Yes, yeah. Bloodletting.
Bloodletting, yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I'm just happy that, the moment I heard Bonnie got the commission, I was like, I gotta go see Bonnie. I'm just really excited. I've worked with Bonnie several times. I've performed in his pieces, and he's just such a prolific writer. So I am so honored to be with esteemed writers and artists. My undergrad was in English, and the emphasis was magical realism. But I think writing in general for me was a way to be heard without speaking. I moved to Chicago from the Philippines when I was 12, and I was like one of one of those kids who really wanted to be American, but it seemed like everything that I did was not American, but more of a fob. So I was like, I used to make fun of myself. I said my English was so bad that I couldn't understand me speak, you know? So that was really the first time I started realizing that I needed another venue to be heard. And luckily, I had a humanities teacher who said, "Why don't you write about it?" And so that opened up a whole new world for me that I didn't really knew existed. Like Oni said, my trade was predominantly acting as well. I moved to LA for grad school. I went to UCLA, and I was kind of like picked out of other artists when I graduated to work on Dog Eaters, the LA premiere with John Lawrence Rivera in 2004. And that just once again changed my life. So, you know, when I moved here when I was 12, my mode was to be as American as possible, meaning kind of eliminating everything Filipino about myself. But then when I graduated, the first job I had as a professional actor was to be Filipino, and surrounded by Filipino Americans and Latino Americans. So it was like, oh, why did I ever leave? So from that point on, I was like, well, this is what I want to do, but realized that the way I looked is still not being represented. This was early 2000, late 90s, right? So I was like, well, if I'm not going to see myself portrayed on screen aside from Latino gangbangers or IT guys or college students, then I might as well write. So that started this writing trajectory for myself. And you know, it's still I'm kind of both. I write and I direct more now. So I think my motto is like really developing narratives for voices of color. And which is kind of funny. I'll stop in a second. It's kind of funny because like when other people ask me, well, why don't you just do one? And I'm like, you wouldn't really ask me that if I was Athol Fugard, if I was Martin Scorsese. You know, you have all these straight white men doing all 3 or 4 or 5, but we never ask them, right? Because it's just is. But for queer people of color, you know, like myself, it's like, why do I have to tell you that I'm doing all these things? At the end of the day, because there are still stories that are not portraying who I am as an individual. And if I'm not being portrayed, then they're not being portrayed. She's not, like everybody else is not being portrayed yet. So.
Yeah, thank you. Kit, how about you?
Thanks both for sharing your incredible journeys and entry points into writing. I came into writing through poetry. I love poetry. I wrote poetry from a young age. I grew up in Hawaii, so I grew up around a lot of like storytelling, song and dance. And I didn't have theater growing up. I think we had a play that I remember seeing one when I was little. I think it was called How the B-52 Learned to Fly. It's those big cockroaches. It was like a youth piece. And then, I don't know, we didn't have like plays and musicals in high school, and we didn't have like a theater program or anything, so it wasn't really on my radar. But I loved poetry, and I love performance poetry, and I like did my first performance poem at like age 9, and like and then when I was in college, I got into slam poetry, and I got into like going on poetry slams, and I did that as like a job for like 10 years, which really I guess for me, like writing a 3-minute poem was like writing a 3-minute play. And then when I met my collaborator, Melissa Lee, in Boston, and we would see each other at primarily queer Asian events. We used to perform at this queer Asian cabaret at Jacques every month. And then one day in the dressing room, I said to her, like, hey, what do you think about quitting your job and going on tour with me? And she was like, well, I hardly know you, but yeah. And so she's a singer-songwriter. And then so we mixed our two mediums together, and she had written a musical. And so we processed the experience of going on the road together through writing that musical. And that was my first entry point into playwriting. So I really learned playwriting by working with Melissa and from like my peers. And it was that first piece that sort of set me on a path towards telling just like longer and longer stories, the things that I was doing in poetry already, but just a longer format.
I am curious, what did your families think when you said, I want to pursue poetry or the arts or acting? How did your family members respond to you? Whoever wants to go first. Gio. I'm calling you Gio. I barely know you. I just called you Gio.
No, don't call me Gio.
Giovanni.
No, that's totally fine. Ines, pardon my sweat. I am sweating right now. Oh God, my goodness. Wait, where's my fan? I have a fan. I'll get it in a moment. But my mom, I come from a family of performers. My Tita Mercy was a singer. My Tito Adele was a Palanca Award-winning playwright. My mom was a cabaret singer. So one would think that they'd be like, yeah, go ahead. My mom was like, why don't you become a nurse? I was like, why not a doctor, Mom? She's like, no, a nurse will make more money because she'll be working, you know? So yeah, it took a very long time for her to really accept that. And this is why, because she knew how hard it was, right? She went through that struggle. You know, she left me when I was 6 months old to the care of my Lola so she could work in Japan and send all that money as a singer so I could go to school, right? I mean, it's kind of like the same thing when I came out to her the first time, the second and the third and the fourth time, right? She was like, I know it's gonna be so hard for you. You know, it doesn't come off in a loving way because she's benign, right? But at the end of the day, now she's like my closest ally, right? And she fully accepts the work that I do. She even corrects me when there's a storyline that she knows of. And for Crier, she was like, it didn't happen that way. She's like, you know, and that's the way she loves. That's the way she says, I love you, because she doesn't say that, right? And that's just cultural, I think, in many ways.
Yeah. Well, go get your fan if you need to.
I don't get my fan.
Bonnie, what about you? How did your family respond?
I like to imagine that it was a lot more conflicted, but it really wasn't. I mean, I did a lot of children's theater as a kid. I did theater in high school. Oh my God, I sound so privileged. My parents let me, I found out about this summer intensive at Boston University. So they let me go off there for a summer in high school in between my junior and senior year. And I think that was really the most formative experience that I had, where it was like, wow, 85 kids from all over the country coming here to learn theater. And that's where I really learned about, like, oh, these are the schools that are, the colleges that are good for going to theater, you know, things that I had no idea about. And so I just started, you know, making notes of like all the places I needed to look into. There's a push-pull. My dad is very supportive, but he's also a gambler. So it's a gamble and he likes going all in. My mom's a little bit more conservative. I was home for the holidays and I saw my uncle, and he said something to the effect of, when are you going to come to your senses? He said, if you move back home, I'll pay for you to go to law school. And I'm just like, we're a little bit past that moment of my life. And I'm not, dissuading anybody who wants to go back to law school after how many careers you've pursued. But yeah, so I mean, that just gives you a picture of how it's regarded in my family. There are some people who are all in. There are some people who quietly accept it, and there are some people who are just like, this is a waste of your time. Yeah, he said it was a waste of my mind. He was like that I was much smarter than that and that I should go to law school.
Oh boy. Wow. How about you, Kit?
My mom had two main concerns, and the first one is like, she didn't exactly know what I was doing, which is probably like the main like barrier there, is that since it wasn't really like an art form or like a livelihood she was familiar with, that she didn't quite know what I wanted to do. But she wasn't unsupportive a whole, like, mostly because I didn't really give her an opportunity to be. I just was like, I'm doing this. But then she did have like a major issue with like the content of my work. So like through my work, I had been exploring my queer and trans identities. And when I had shared like a queer identity with her, I explored that through my writing. And when I was sharing a transgender identity with her, I explored that through my writing, and all of my writing lives in that world. And so I think she was kind of concerned that like people would harm me because I was telling them about who I am, and that was like a scary thought to her. And it's a thought I kind of get. I'm like, yeah, I understand why you're saying that, because you care about me, and this world is a scary place sometimes for like queer and trans folks. And so there was like a lot of concern about telling my business and my family business like as a practice. And I think the tide started turning when she started coming to my stuff, and she could see that there were other people that were really the work was resonating with, and that there were other people like me and other people who made this kind of art. And so I think once my family got to experience the community, the rich community that we're a part of, it became less scary for them to understand that it was like a place I could find like other people, and that I think was really the key. But I'd say like now my family's like super supportive. They just are like really into me doing whatever I'm doing, even if they don't quite understand it. Like I tried to show her what a musical is, and she didn't quite get it, but I don't think she cared, because the songs are fun, and there was like a lot of like heart in the singing, and she like loves singing.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. So as writers, I know you, so Kit, you talked about your poetry. Giovanni and Bonnie, I know you started off as actors. You could have pivoted into a different writing medium. Say, you could have written for TV, you could have written for film, and maybe some of you do. But what is it about theater? What is it about the medium of theater that keeps pulling you back? Kit, why don't you take that?
Yeah, great question. Theater for me is like such a beautiful experience, because I came from performance poetry, and I just love live experiences. So there's nothing quite like the energy of the room when you're there with like other people. For me particularly, because all of my main characters are trans, it really is, I think, an opportunity for people to feel like really human. That if you think you don't know anyone in your life that's trans, then and you can't get the experience of like being with someone by reading a book or watching TV. it's like the really unique experience of like seeing and feeling trans people on stage and trans bodies and trans voices and narratives that I think is really important to me, is to like show, like be really, really human in the process of creating theater. And that goes for me for like characters that are queer and people of color and Asian American and of different ages. It's really important for that really human element to be very present. And I really just, I'm like extremely social, and I just like love people and being around people. And I think I love making theater because you have to do it with a lot of people. Even like when I did like a solo show, it's only me on stage, but it's like dozens of people behind the scenes. And I think I just love the teamwork element of theater as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Bonnie, what about you? What do you love about the theater?
I think it's just, it's that live connection. It's irreplaceable. There's a sense of community. There is that amazing feeling when the audience is in sync, in breath with the play. And I'm a big fan of like catharsis. And catharsis can happen not in a theater, obviously, but when it does happen in a theater, it's just an indescribable kind of feeling. Yeah, so, it is a struggle now because the times that we're in right now, and I try to support with Zoom readings and attending people's stuff, but it's just not the same. It's not, yeah, it's sad. And, because theaters are probably going to be one of the last places to open back up, and the lack of leadership overall in our country about trying to fight this virus is, yeah. I mean, sometimes I sit down and write and I'm like, what's the point? Someone's going to slate this in their season in 2032. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't want, yeah, like I'm part of this one writers group at the Geffen, and they all asked us, we can give you a Zoom reading now, or, you can wait till a live reading. And we actually all opted for the live reading, not knowing when that would be. So yeah, there's something incredible about theater. And I'm not so much a pessimist that I'm like, oh, it will never recover, because it will. Theater has lasted, the test of time. But yeah, it's that indescribable feeling. And I'm not saying it happens at everything you go to, because it certainly doesn't for me. But when it does happen, it's unparalleled really in experience.
I agree. Giovanni, what do you think?
So I have my fan. I'm not sweating as much. It's a communal experience. It's a spiritual existence that people share. One of my mentors, Alleluia Panis from Cool Art, said, a playwright creates this universe inside their head. The director takes it out of their head and kind of throws it up in the air, and it's the architect that puts it together, and then it's passed on to the actors, who then breathe life into it. And simultaneously, while this is happening, you have the costume designers giving cloth to the words, and the scenic designer, the lights, and if there's music, all of it is coming together. It's like going to, I remember my Lola, when she starts cooking and all the titas start coming and they start cooking, it's like a barrio fiesta, right? And then the rehearsal process is like, anong timpla? Is it good? Is it right? You're testing the taste and the essence of the food. But then when the audience arrives is when it becomes ours, because it was never mine, it was never the directors, it was never the actors, but it's ours. It becomes this ohana experience, to coin, Hawaii culture. It actually took me a while to get. I think I was just like this fight or flight mode of being an immigrant in America, where it's like, well, okay, so theater is not happening, so what else can we do, right? Oh, we have to do film. We have to do film, right? We have to do this virtual existence. And then I was talking with Prince Gumovilis, and he was like, yeah, it's when children start laughing and talking back to the actors that is so important. And I was like, oh my goodness. I was like so busy trying to solve and trying to like, what else can we do? That I forgot that it's this energy. It's like eating together. It's such a sensorial experience. That's what it is. It's a sensorial experience that we don't really get when, as much as you want to do Zoom readings, right? Or virtual shares, or even watching a show. You don't have that exchange of spirit, so to speak, or you're not sharing food with the audience.
I love
oh my
that.
God. Yeah.
I love the idea of the analogy of breaking bread, right? Of sharing a meal with your family, with your community, because it is about this act of sharing and this act of exchanging that is nourishment to some extent. And I miss it too. We really do miss it. So for those of you who are watching this, we released today on our social media networks a video where each of our commissioned playwrights talk about the plays that we've commissioned them to write. And it's really wonderful. So I encourage you to watch that. But I would like to spend a little time, if I may, asking the three of you what themes. I think the real question is why write what you write? But I don't want to get too esoteric, and I also don't want to get too sort of broad. I want to talk about this moment and the story you want to write. What inspired you to find this story, to sort of discover the story within you, and why is it important to you? Let's start with Bonnie.
Yeah. Why do I write? I write because I want to see people that I recognize on the stage. So that's inclusion, diversity, representation. I want to write for Filipino bodies inhabiting Filipino roles on the stage, which is very, hooray for Miss Saigon that has employed thousands of Filipinos, but I find the M butterfly trope really tired and old. And yeah, I'm just trying to, I write what's of interest to me, and I always wrestle as I get started on new play if anyone else will find this interesting. But then at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter, because writing is largely an individual process until you bring in other people to collaborate, and then whether you decide it's in a good enough place that you want to share it and extend its life to an audience, right? So I'm always looking for stories that are of interest to me. I'm always looking for intersectionality. Filipinos didn't just pop up here recently. I'm always looking for points of history. I'm working on a play right now about the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, where the Philippines was an exhibit, and they shipped in 1,000 Filipinos to come and inhabit 40 acres so that people could come in and look at the natives. And it was meant to celebrate America's imperialism, right? And it's one of those things where I'm like, why didn't I know about this? Why is it not like till well into my adulthood that I know about something like this? So those are things that I kind of want to shed light on. The play Duty Free that I pitched to San Diego Rep, it's a little bit more political. Early on, I've always backed away from, being political, in quotes, because art is political, inevitably, whether you want it to be or not. It's political by what's included, but by what's excluded. So I guess that's a little bit in the zeitgeist since 2016. And I am borrowing a little bit from the journalist Maria that Duterte has targeted in the Philippines. And just recently, I guess she's been in the news because she was sentenced to prison, right? And George Clooney's wife, Amal Clooney, has taken on her case, right? So it's kind of right of the moment. So I'm using that as a point of departure to examine the relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines historically, and how the American dream is a colonial tool, not just for Filipinos, but I think even for Americans who are born here. It's this elusive kind of thing. So I'm always, I guess I'm always examining the American dream. I'm like, really, what is that? The American dream shouldn't be about having a good job that has benefits and health insurance. Like, that's not, you know what I mean? That should not be a dream, right? So I guess I'm always looking for those. I'm overthinking. I overthink things a lot of the times. But yeah, those are the things I think about when I'm looking for, like, oh, that might be a way into examining the American dream yet again. You know what I mean? Because big ideas get written about a lot by different playwrights, and each playwright has a different, unique point of view on it. So yeah, the American dream, I think largely because my parents are immigrants, and the recent amplification of xenophobia in our country. So those things are at the top of my mind as of late. Sorry to have rambled.
No, that was beautiful. Thank you. I have had the privilege of watching a play written by you, and it was not directly about immigration, but I can say that the idea of being a Filipino-American, you explored that as somewhat, in the play that I saw, Bloodletting, with the brother and sister relationship. It reminded me of my relationship with my brothers, and how that identity of an immigrant is constantly informing not just how we navigate the U.S., but then how we navigate our homeland. I mean, that's huge for me anyway. Going back to the Philippines is it's a very fraught experience. So anyway, but we can talk about that later on, you and I. And full disclosure, Bonnie went to youth theater with my husband. Yes?
Yes. I think that's how you ended up coming to my show, because we're friends on Facebook. We did children's theater together way, way back upon a day. Yeah.
Small world.
So it's a small world. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for that. Kit, how about you?
Let's see. I'm super excited to work on my piece for San Diego Rep, because it's a personal story. It's an opportunity for me to process something that happened in my life. So I forgot what year. It must have been like 20, I don't know, a while ago. There was I don't really remember how I ended up doing this, but I ended up being in a pageant, and it was the first ever Mr. Trans Man pageant. And I was, this like, it's like not my thing. Like you had to
Where
like,
was this?
it was in Brooklyn at the Knitting Factory. And this cabaret artist named Murray Hill was like the host of it. And I ended up in this pageant. I didn't really know what I was doing, but all my friends helped me. They were like, "Oh, we got you." They're all political organizers and lawyers and people that ran campaigns. And so they're like, "Okay, we're gonna get you a platform. We're gonna help you make a character and like get your costumes together." And then they did mock interviews with me, like in a pageant. And they totally like ran it like a campaign. They had a sign making party, and they made like dozens of extra signs and took those signs to the pageant and gave them to basically strangers who are like, "You're on Team Kit now." And so I like entered this pageant, and I had a really complicated like relationship with the word man. And so I entered this pageant going like, I don't think I'm a man, but like now I'm in this pageant and I have to sort of like try to win a title with the word man in it. What does that mean for me? And so I entered the pageant in character as a baby. And so I was like wearing diapers and like for like floaties, and for evening wear I wore like a onesie because that's what babies wear at night and stuff like that. And so I was like on stage just like being a baby the whole time. And maybe like for me, it was very political. I was playing with the ideas of like Asian fetishization of like our bodies, and being people thinking that being feminine is like negative, and what masculinity is for Asian Americans, and that sort of thing. And it was like a really unique experience, to say the least. And like as a baby, people were really shocked and kind of confused for most of the time. And then in my talent portion, I did a poem that was extremely graphic and sexual. And I think that's when people were really confused and uncomfortable, because they're like, this baby is now very sexual on stage. And so I was just like really fucking some minds up that night. And also you know, like really asking myself some questions about like masculinity and maleness and what being a man is, and what if I was a trans man, and how what my relationship with to that word was. And so in this play, I sort of want to ask those questions about like gender and performance, particularly gender performativity, and what it means to live your daily life through gendered lenses and actions, and also to examine like beauty and what pageantry is. There's like a whole really cool world of like alternative pageantry that is like Mr. Trans Man. So, you know, there's like Mr. Ms. Mix Coney Island, there's Miss Les, there's like a world of pageants like this. And so I wanted to sort of like zoom into that point.
That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. So in your play, we get to sort of relive the pageant as you experienced it?
It won't be spot on. It will probably, I mean, it'll be fiction. It'll be fiction. We'll see.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Did you win?
I didn't know if I should share that or not.
Okay, sorry.
I guess I don't know what happened in the play. I did win. And my writing partner Melissa is always like, "Oh my gosh, Kit, the first ever Mr. Trans Man is a trans baby."
Was that the first year they held that pageant?
Yeah.
Has it continued?
Yeah, and then I came back as a judge.
I'm so glad you returned.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Giovanni, the butterfly of Chula Vista, or Chula Vista, as my parents say. So what was the inspiration behind that?
I was like, I hope she reiterates the question because after Ken and Bodhi, I'm like, I'm so out. Like, I just want to be in their place. I just want to see their place. Oh my gosh. Well, it was kind of, Danielle and I have kind of been corresponding for a couple of years. And so I was offering some ideas, and I have to hand it to Danielle because she was like, oh, do you have anything about nurses? And I was like, oh, well, and my thing about that is it could easily become a trope storyline, which is something that I definitely do not want to do. And, I've steered away from it. And so in the next few weeks, thinking about that, I was like, why is there a wall? Why is this stopping you, right? It's not just the societal perception of Filipino Americans around the world of OFWs, which is something that that's kind of like my creative research, right? The immigrant's diasporic imagination through the lens of people who leave, right? And as you all know, Bagong Bayani, the new heroes of the Philippines, 10% leave the country to work outside in the Middle East, in Europe, in the Americas, in Africa, right? So I wanted to make sure, and most of them are nurses. Many of them are nurses, not most, not all, but many are nurses. So as I dug in, I knew that this was not just surface, right? I was like, well, who in my life are in this medical field? And I just kind of like, let's kind of unpeel it, right? So I have my aunt in the Middle East. I have my closest cousin is an NP. I have another cousin who's an LPN. I have my mom who's now a CNA. I have my sister-in-law who is an RN. So I'm like, let's uncover this. My ninang is a nurse. And I'm like, wait a minute. This is not just a trope because this is personal. This is the narrative of my family, right? And that scared me. And I was like, then I have to write about it. Because if it scares me, there's something there that I have to unearth, right? So I started talking to my family members, right? Because there's like, and what I want to show is nursing is just a template of the Filipino diaspora, because we're not just one thing, right? Being Filipino American, Filipino, there's so many. You have Duterte fans, you have people in the military, you have Filipino Americans who, my brother is Filipino American, he was born, so you have all these different layers that I would like to reveal through the lens of being a nurse, because there's not just one nurse. There's the registered nurse, there's the vocational nurse, there's the nurse practitioner. There are so many levels to it. But also just to kind of this is my goal, is to try to see the mirror of like gender identity, right? Of being like, as a drag performer, I was like, what I don't know how it's going to happen yet. And that's the beautiful part about it. There's something about what we put on as a persona, as drag performers, that is something to be investigated, right? Who am I when I go see my mom? Who am I when I teach? You know, what do I put on? What is I call it my armor. What kind of persona do I present myself when I'm with my friends, right? So that's what the butterfly is all about. I hope. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, what you're talking about, I refer to as code switching, right? And I think as Filipinos and Asian Americans in general, I think I can say this, we are very adaptable. We know how to read the room and sort of engage in the way that the room demands. And that is code switching. You know, I think that's probably something that all people of color have to do. But yeah, I am really looking forward also to this idea. There's a regional element, obviously, like you know, in your play, Giovanni, where you've identified the exact location of, well, National City, even though in the title it's Chula Vista. But I love the regional element because it is interesting to me how, well, I know the Bay Area also has a lot of Filipinos, San Diego certainly, and Hawaii also has a lot of Filipinos. And these regional hubs of Filipino Americans, there are these multiple identities. It's not just the one, right? It's like there's just, yeah, just like any other community, there are endless types of people, and I'm so excited to get to know your protagonist. So fantastic! I'm so excited that this is all just so inspiring, and I do hope that you know, we can safely reopen in the future. I don't even want to say in the near future because of what's happening right now, but and that we will see these stories on stage. That really truly is my hope and desire. One final question for the three of you, and you've actually touched on this already. What do you feel is the role of the storyteller, the role / responsibility of the storyteller in today's landscape? We are dealing with a pandemic. We are dealing with huge inequality. We are dealing with racial injustice. I mean, there are just so many things happening right now. How do you feel the storyteller should be responding in this moment? Or is there a responsibility to begin with? Kit, why don't you start?
Something you said, Bonnie, really resonated with me when you were talking about like being included or excluded. And I think there's a real parallel between making theater and like writing history books in terms of like whose stories are told and whose stories are not told. And if we are not the archivists and historians of our own lives and stories, I cannot trust the systems around us to do that for us. And so I do think there's a great responsibility in documenting our own narratives, because like Bonnie, I had not learned about the World's Fair until I had watched that PBS documentary either. And then not only was that one story I didn't know about, I would say most of the stories in there I didn't know about. And so I just like really believe in documenting our own histories and herstories and queer stories, and not just like the big things that happen, but the little moments, like how we make family, how we build friendships, how we eat food, how we move through conflict one-on-one. I think it's all so important to document, and that for me comes with a lot of power. And so the responsibility for me also is not just telling the story, but then making sure it gets executed properly with the right team of folks on stage and authentic casting and dramaturgy and producers. It's all, it really matters, like who's telling the story in every single way.
Thank you. Giovanni, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree to what Kit says. Yeah, just it's so important for artists or for writers to and theater makers, right, to immortalize humanity. I think that's one aspect that actually separates us from history books, because there's the human element that we really infuse in it, as opposed to a more pedagogical assessment of how things were. But also to agree to Kit, like, 2,000 years of heteronormative straight white lens is kind of like, I'm over it. And I think the whole world is, as we see it unfolding. It's disheartening, but so inspiring to see that maybe we're starting to kind of shatter the glass. Hopefully, right? In Islam, we say, inshallah, that's happening. And this is a really fascinating time to really tell the narratives of people whose stories we've never seen or have been told in a totally different way, right? So like just kind of like, I'm over fragility, I'm over all these things that are happening right now. And we are, oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying we are kind of over it, I feel. So the way to move forward is to write these stories, right? So we don't forget.
Yeah. Bonnie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I believe totally in the like playwright as holding mirror to society. And I think also that it's really about specificity of your point of view as a storyteller. When I have like student writers who are like trying to tell big epic stories, the big epic stories usually come from that very personal individual kernel. Because if we go by the old adage that every play has already been written, I kind of believe that. It's just what makes it unique is the individual who's telling that story. So I always try to just go with the specific and hoping that that has impact, that it can cross boundaries, and that in that specificity, you oftentimes, that's when you find the universality, right? Like I teach an LGBTQ class, critical studies class, and we were studying The Normal Heart by Larry Kramer, who just passed, God bless. But that was a very specific story about a white gay man who was really frustrated with the lack of action by the government in regards to AIDS. And that seems really dated, but then we hit this pandemic and you're just like, oh, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, this is what it's like, where people are afraid to go to the grocery store and people are, hoarding water, and you know what I mean? It's that fear. So I feel like as much critique I have of The Normal Heart, there's just something in its specificity that transcends time that can reach multiple populations. So that's what I always aim for. I write for myself and hope to affect many more beyond my circle.
Thank you. And that is just a great way to wrap this up. Kit, Giovanni, Bonnie, it's such an honor and privilege to have spent this last hour with you and to continue to work with you on your plays. I'm really excited about our futures together. And hopefully, you know, people will behave and will, you know, kick this virus to the curb, and then we can all go back to work. And in the meantime, please stay well, stay safe. Much peace and love and inspiration to all of you. And thank you, thank you, thank you. We're so thrilled that we can share your work with our audience.
Thank you,
Thank
Kim.
you so much.
Take care.